Hey, welcome to Genre Exposure, a film podcast. Join us as we explore the wide world of cinema, broaden our horizons one movie at a time. I'm one of your hosts, Dustin, and as usual, well, this time I'm all alone actually, so we've had an incident occur. Nothing major, nothing terrible. Jason had some family business come up, some stuff he really needed to take care of, and there was just no way we could sync up together to record the next episode. Which, as you know, should be Heroic Purgatory. Kind of my weird surrealist counterpoint to his pick of Kachiku. Still focusing on the weird, student movement revolution stuff from the 60s in Japan. We will return to our regular scheduled program next time around, hopefully. We have that episode mostly in the works. We just need to sit down and actually have the conversation. But I don't like to miss episodes, so the last time we actually did miss, that was my fault. I was sick, I was laid up, there was no way to do anything about it. But this time, I'm in action, I'm able to do stuff, and so I guess here we are, and I'm going to try to fill a slot again. So when I thought about doing that again, if you listen to the other one I did earlier, solo Endeavor wants to cover for us, and I was never quite a fan of the whole solo podcast recording thing. I get that that's a thing, and a lot of people like to do it. I don't particularly, but there was no real way to scare us up another guest or anything, so I think I'm just going to borrow from that earlier episode and do the same thing again, and this will just be a continuing chapter for Dustin's J-Horror Journal. And I'll just make that its own little mini-series, and that will just kind of be its own little thing that keeps happening anytime we need one of these weird, filler episodes. And as far as a parameter, I guess I'll keep it a weird little mini echo of our normal show. But I'll just talk about odd J-horror films, because that's my niche, that's what I love. Maybe the next time I'm sick, I can talk Jason up into doing this, and you can get Jason's TV movie guide or something. That would be cool. That's kind of one of his niches that he's really into, so. My other thought with this too is, since I'm just filling time basically, I want to focus on maybe some more obscure films that don't get talked about enough, don't get talked about as much. Perhaps some that don't even have proper releases worldwide outside of Japan. To show some love there, and then maybe pull that energy and try to manifest a proper release for them, which would be cool. And I thought no better place to start on this than with the 2014 film Death Forest. And that's directed by Masataka Ichimi, who really is only known for kind of this film and its sequel, and I think he's done one other thing to his name, so. And that's a trend you'll see with pretty much the entire cast of this film. Their only credits are this film or other sequels in the series. They have one standout guy, Daijiro Kawaoka. He plays one of the main characters. He's been in some other genre films. He has a leading role in Summer Time Machine Blues, which got a cool release recently from Third Window Films. I noticed he had cropped up in some Kamen Rider and Super Sentai flicks, which is cool. And he has a role in the live-action film for the Boogie Pop franchise, Boogie Pop and Others, from the 2000s, which is pretty awesome. But otherwise, it's a bunch of, unknown souls that are kind of wrapped up into this film. And the thing about this film is that it's based on a game, which I want to talk about, I think, before I talk about the film. And it somehow spawned 4 more sequels. So there's 5 of these things kicking around. None of them have proper English releases. If you're going to find them, there are subtitles out there. I've seen some that are kind of cleaned up, and then some that are just it looks like they took the Japanese subtitles, ran them through Babelfish to Chinese, and then took them to English, and they're kind of a jumbled mess. That said, I think it's a very simple film as far as a plot, so even if you can only find the one with bad subs, if you're familiar with Japanese cinema, especially J-horror, you can kind of tease out the plot yourself anyways. There's nothing revolutionary going on here, but it is interesting. So I guess let's start with the game, the source of this and where it came from. So Death Forest was a computer game made by a developer named Kaz. He developed it in Unity, which is pretty ubiquitous for PC games. And it's just like a little first-person survival horror game that's really short. It's set in Aokigahara, which we would know as the Suicide Forest. Apt setting that's been used in many a film, including a few American films that should be spoken less of. And really, this game, to sum it up in like real simple terms, and I'll put some links to like YouTube playthroughs of it just so you can get a feel for it. It's actually, there's a translation of it to English, and you can download it and play it, and I'll throw that link in the show notes as well, in case you're just eager to try it. But I would mostly compare it to a popular Western game from some time ago, Slender the Eight Pages, which was sort of one of the first fan games based on the whole Slenderman phenomenon. So if you know that game, you're just kind of like a dude who shows up in like a foresty, creepy area, and you're running around with your flashlight, and you're trying to collect pages that have been scattered around the forest, and Slenderman pursues you. And it was super popular. It got a huge amount from people doing like let's play videos of it. Blew up. Eventually got its own like kind of more properly produced game called Slender the Arrival. It actually came out for consoles and everything. That was sort of just a bigger budget blow up of the premise. And so really Death Forest feels sort of like that premise but filtered through like a J-horror vibe. So in the game you play as a guy named Kazuki Uchida, and while driving through Aokigahara on your motorbike, it breaks down. And just as sort of nightfall is setting in, and your only respite is to kind of run around the woods and look for the supplies you need to scavenge to fix your motorbike and get it running again. And while doing so, you have to survive against several creepy, very like iconic-y looking J-horror sort of entities that stalk you and chase after you. And it's one of those deals where you can't really fight, you can't really do anything but just run and try to survive. And a bit like Slender 8 Pages, there are files that you can collect, and each file can kind of give you some more info and lore about the entities that are after you. And it's got that sort of mechanic where like the flashlight has batteries, and you have to collect batteries, and if you use it too much, it runs out, and that's kind of your fail states, is if you get caught by one of the monsters, or if your flashlight runs out of power, you'll just kind of be insta-killed and go to a game over. So it's a very simple game. Even the graphics, like, they're not great, but there's something compelling and kind of weirdly charming about them, also in a way. It makes me think of a lot of like PlayStation 1 survival horror games, like your Resident Evil, your Silent Hill. And yeah, like the creatures are like odd but strangely compelling at the same time. So there's kind of 4 iconic ones in the game, and they'll filter into the film. So let's just go ahead and talk about them now. I would say it's sort of the face of the franchise is Yoshie. And Yoshie is like basically this giant head of a woman that just kind of floats along and pursues after you. It's got the pale white skin, the black dark hair. And at least in the game, her face is in this like permanent, twisted, big smile with like bloody teeth. It's very disturbing, very creepy. In the game, she pursues you through the entire thing. So like some of them are gated by like an area where you're in this area, that creature will try to come after you. But she'll pursue you the whole way. So that definitely makes her one of the more iconic people of this. And then they have the Stranger, which is just sort of a pale, white, skinny, looks like a human with like razor sharp teeth. And kind of a crazy look on his face with like no hair, he's just bald. And he kind of triggers in a specific area when you find the gasoline can for the motorbike. And you've got the Stranger, which is another sort of weird, pale humanoid. This one's more iconic for having like the big, black, dark pools for his eyes. And is a bit more like hulking and imposing compared to the Stalker. And then the UMA or UMA, which of course that's an acronym for Unknown Mysterious Animal. Basically another way of saying a cryptid. But it's like the most curious one. It is humanoid, but it's like very large and lanky and has like super, super long arms and legs that are like gnarled and bent, and it's kind of crouched down to the ground, almost like it would walk on all fours, but it doesn't. It almost looks like a J-horror ghost that's been twisted to be some kind of like beast of some sort. And it sort of has its own little area that's sort of like this like underground warehouse looking place that you find that it pursues you when you enter that area. Yeah, but there's not a lot of plot. Like, you can collect these files and you get little bits and pieces of the lore of, like, who are these monsters? How did they become what they are? That sort of thing. It's essentially like most good J horror stories, people that have been murdered, and in their death, they've become the monster now to kind of carry on like a grudge. Um, but yeah, simple little story, simple little plot. It's a pretty short game. If you look at like speedrunners, they can clear it in about 5 minutes if you know what you're doing and know where you're going and know how to kind of work the monsters to easily get past them. So it's not like a deep game or anything, but it's small, it's fun, it's good for a scare, especially for like horror games. But surprisingly, it spawned all these films, and that's where we will get into the movie and get into the interesting stuff there, and see like how they took just this little core premise and then like stretched that out into something. And I guess before we dive into that, I do want to talk a little bit more about Slenderman, just because that definitely feels like kind of a core piece of inspiration material on this game. As you know, there's plenty of media on that sort of fictional character. Again, it spawned originally, of course, from an internet meme that got out of control. There is the like big budget theatrical film Slenderman, I think from 2018, I want to say. Write in and let me know what you think of that film, because I think it's pretty much a dud. Like, it has very little to do with Slenderman and more to do with the like sensational news story where like the kid attacked someone else and was trying to kill them because they said that Slenderman told them to. Which that's like, there's all this mythos about Slenderman. We could go super deep on that for forever, but I'm not going to in this episode. Be good if we ever covered one of those like films related to his character to really, really get into it. But yeah, when you get into it, there's all sorts of like fan culture around it, and there's all these like stories of people being like proxies that are commanded by Slenderman, and it gets on and on and on and on. But the movie didn't really feel like it was about Slenderman as much as it was about like the media sensationalism around it, and then making like a fictional version of that stabbing incident, which kind of like, to me, it like misses what is cool about Slenderman as an idea, and then also sort of, I felt like it was like mining a real situation that was awful for profit. Just kind of shitty. So, but if we want to walk backwards some, so in 2016 there is Beware the Slender Man, which is a documentary film, and that's more about the actual incident and what happened, and sort of follows the phenomenon of how it started as a creepypasta and developed and grew and gained this big following. And it in particular talks about the 8 Pages game, as well as other things like in Minecraft. They developed, of course, the Enderman, which is like a character inspired by Slenderman completely. And then kind of what I think is maybe your best media touchstone if you want to get into any of that stuff, which is Marble Hornets, which was like part YouTube web show, part alternate reality game. Ran for a few years. I think if you're a found footage fan, it's definitely worth checking out, because that is sort of the format. It's framed as like, it's presented as a real thing, and it's supposed to be someone's like little vlog. And you kind of have to like follow it and get into the depths of the story, and it has multiple seasons and develops and grows and gets bigger and bigger. Super cool. I'll link to it. It's all on YouTube and you can check it out. I'm a big fan of it. I think it was very well made. They also made a follow-up series that it never had time to like flesh out, but it was called Clear Lakes 44. And it had this really cool, like, the whole premise of the show was like, it was just the like security cameras from all around a city. And so it had this weird like voyeuristic, like you're just watching people live their lives, but then like weird, very trippy, very surreal things would happen. And it was kind of building up to a thing to be like, I guess it was going to explain what was going on, but we never got any more of it, so that was unfortunate. But I guess the last little rundown on this is there is one more film, and it came out in 2015, and that is Always Watching, a Marble Hornets story, which was where they kind of licensed the actual like Marble Hornets lore of Slenderman and turned that into a feature film. It's sort of like a tie-in. It's set in the universe of Marble Hornets, but it's its own story. I remember when it came out, it kind of shot straight to direct-to-video. I think it dropped initially into like video on demand even. And there was maybe like a tiny theatrical run for it, but Notable because they had Doug Jones play Slenderman, which is like great choice, I think. I mean, he just kills it completely. But all in all, I think it was regarded pretty poorly, and it was kind of seen as a bit of a letdown. But I actually quite like it. I think that if you just need like the Slenderman experience and you just want to watch one movie and sit down and be done, I think it like does that, and it does it well, and it kind of gets you all of the elements that's cool about it without overwhelming you or being some larger commitment. So I know a lot of people haven't seen that, so maybe that's one you can circle back to and check out. I'm sure it's out there somewhere. And if not, I can't imagine the DVDs cost too much, really. Okay, but with that out of the way, let's get into the actual film itself, and we'll talk about that. Alright, so Death Forest from 2014, Masataka Echimi. This is one of his only features that he's directed. The other notable one is Death Forest 2, which I guess if I end up keeping on with doing these, I'll just go through the whole series, because why not? I'm actually curious how they would tease this into more films. So, the movie opens in Aokigahara. We get our titular suicide forest that the film and the game is set in. And we've got an individual riding their motorbike. And this is, in fact, Kazuki Uchida, our main character from the game. And they kind of attempt to, the thing about the game is they don't really tell you anything about Kazuki, like who he is, why he's there, what's going on. So the first thing this film does is try to invent like a story around him. And so we learn that he is like a reporter. He does like investigative reports and news stories and stuff. And we see him like riding through the forest, and he comes to this spot and stops and gets out, and he's got some flowers, and he lays them at the side of the road and starts to pray. Clearly, something in memorial for someone that's passed on. It must have been like, did they commit suicide in the forest? Was there some sort of accident? We don't really know, but he gets a phone call, and it quickly becomes apparent that he's speaking to his boss, his editor, and they're kind of talking a little bit about like what he's working on, and that, once he gets back, he'll get it taken care of. But it gets into like sort of the hook of what the game is. Like his bike is like acting funny, doesn't want to work, and he starts to sort of wander around, and we get a little like initial fake out jump scare where we see actually the Yoshie from the game like creeping up behind him, and then there's like a smash cut to some other characters. And so we pick up with like a group of friends. It's just some like attractive 20-somethings. Our lead is Saki, played by Momoko Midorikawa, and then she's joined by Ayaka, played by Ayuka Ono, Masaya, played by Yoshinori Tanaka, and Takashi, played by Shogo Tajima. And essentially they've come out for like a weekend in the forest. They've rented a cabin. They're staying there. They're just doing your typical like horror film 20-somethings like event of just, they're out there, they're drinking, they're having a good time, they're chatting, they're hanging out. They're all pretty bored. They're talking about, they're almost at the end of their trip and they're going to have to head back to campus. And it reaches a point where Saki needs to go and retrieve something from the car. They're talking about some photos they took as they're exploring the forest earlier, and they were taking pictures with their camera. And so Saki decides to go out and retrieve it. And we get a bit of a fake out like tension release moment where like we start to get that ominous like it's the same tune that's like in the game even of like one of the creatures is there. And she's kind of glancing around and she sees like just for a second it looks like one of the white skinned like creatures from the game. You can't really tell if it's maybe the stalker or the stranger, but it's one of them. And we get this fake out jump scare where it turns out to be one of the other dudes that's with them. And it turns out to be this whole big setup where like they turned the lights off in the house and faked her out to make her think something happened, and it was all just to scare her. And she's really upset. She falls down. She like twists her ankle, kind of strains it a little bit. Not a cool thing really, I guess. Kind of just bullying her for their entertainment, but One of the dudes kind of feels bad about it. The other one's kind of like, well, whatever. But it passes without incident. They go back inside, and the next day they're packing up to head home. And Saki gets approached by two police detectives. And they're sort of canvassing the area and checking every building, anywhere that there's people. And they ask her about some missing people. There's been a lot of people in the area that have gone missing lately. And they're looking for one particular person, and they show him the photo of Kazuki from the intro. He has gone missing apparently, and like after being contacted by the place he works for and writes for, they're out there trying to find him. And there's a bit of a tease of like Saki wonders like, oh, are these people like in trouble or something, or what's going on? And they don't really know what's going on, so they sort of just say like, hey, if you see anything, let us know. But watch out, be safe, that sort of thing. So they set out in their car, they start driving back, they're heading back home. There's a bit of complaint about how long it's going to take, and there's talk about like, oh, one of them knows about a shortcut they've heard about, but it cuts like right through the depths of the forest, but it could be faster, and it's a little dry, I would say, but it is very like par for the course for this kind of movie. So eventually one of them, Ayaka, she needs to go to the bathroom, and then some of them are hungry, so they happen to find a restaurant just sort of on the side of the road. And they stop off there, and there's this kind of, strange, mysterious old woman, that whole trope. They identified her in the credits as Saito, but I don't think her name is ever spoken in the film, so at first it seems like the place is kind of closed down or, abandoned or something, but eventually she opens it, she lets them in, she offers to get them food. They have a meal there, they pay, they head out. And she overhears them talking about like this shortcut, and she sort of confirms that it exists, but there's a bit of an ominous mention about like, oh, you don't want to be caught out there after dark. So that sets up sort of the central, hook of the game, that at night these entities come out and pursue people. And so they drive a little ways, they find the turnoff for this shortcut road, and against better judgment decide to take it so they can quickly get out of the forest and get back home. They proceed through it, they pass through a few tunnels, which of course is another ominous, great part of a lot of J-horror films when you have these like abandoned tunnels to drive through. And after they pass through one, they sort of, start having car trouble, which it's another typical in the forest horror film trope, but the engine starts steaming, they have to come to a stop. There's some comical, like, they have to connive the reasons for them to stay out there, so it's a good little plot twist of, like, they're checking it seems like the engine's overheated. At first they're like, oh, well, there's no worries, we have a whole bottle of water, we can just dump that on it, probably get it going again. And then it turns out that Ayaka decided that she was very thirsty and drank it all. So they're stranded, they kind of need to find water to get the engine under control. And after a little bit of debate, they pair off into boy-girl pairs and go different directions seeking water. And this is maybe where I should say, I think the score of this film is like really, really good. It's one of the more standout parts, I think. It was composed by someone called Flat Street Smith, and it appears this film was their only credit, which is unfortunate because it was pretty good. All in all, the film has a pretty low budget in general, and especially the cameras, you can tell, like, it's not the highest quality, but I think for the budget, they make it work pretty well. So, Saki's team, as they're searching, they go deeper into the forest. They start to hear the sound of running water, but it's a little not right. It almost is more like a gurgling in some ways. And eventually, in the distance, they see this like white figure just standing there. And it's hard to make out which of the entities it is, but it's clearly one of them. And Saki remarks that she saw it the night before for a split second, right before they jumped out and scared her. And it sort of unnerves them, and they make their way and start heading back in the end, and decide not to pursue that. And there is some throwaway character development here where, like, Saki and the dude talk a bit about the prank last night, and he sort of apologizes and, does the right thing. It's like, hey, that was kind of shitty of us. So that's nice. Meanwhile, Ayaka and her guy, they find the, like, abandoned warehouse factory place, which is another of the locations in the game. And while they're there, they manage to get some water, like, dripping off the ceiling. and collect that in a bottle, but it's not really quite enough. And then they randomly just get fucking attacked by Uchida, who is like there and in a panic. And he does some interesting things where, like, in fear of them, he points the flashlight and tries to like shine it at them as if that's going to stop them somehow. Which ends up being a plot point because it seems like light like repels or like holds back these creatures. It's almost like, if they're vampires, this is like the cross for them is just light. Or a good example is the game Alan Wake, which I'm quite a fan of. But obviously it has no effect on them because they're actual humans, so there's a bit of a scuffle. And in the end, he like runs off. So they're left to go back to the van. They all kind of reconvene. And then Uchida like jumps them and tries to take the car and drive away. Of course, he doesn't know that it's disabled currently. So there's a bit more of a scuffle, and they ultimately knock him out and sit him in the car. And he wakes up. They try to like ascertain who he is, what's going on out there. He is sort of warning them that, once it becomes night, they're going to be in danger, and they need light to protect themselves, and that even if they leave the car on all night, eventually the battery could run out at some point. And there's a bit of back and forth about, like, how old the battery is and how much power it might have left, and all kind of contrived and a little pointless, and there becomes a bit of talk then about, like, well, maybe someone should run back to that store and try to use the phone there and call someone and get some help, or maybe we should just continue down this road and try to reach the end of it and get out of the forest already on foot. No one can really agree on what to do. And so finally, like, one of the guys sort of takes charge, and he decides that, like, he'll go back and he'll make the run to try to get back to that restaurant and call them some help. So he takes one of the flashlights that they have and sets off on his own. And we follow him for a bit, and they kind of tease him passing by the stalker individual, like the bald, like pale-skinned man with razor-sharp teeth. He looks great in this film. He's like the best-looking part. Really good makeup work, really good like blood effects all over his mouth and his teeth. It just looks super good, and it's one of the better bit of like costuming and effects in this film. We never see really what happens to this guy. I guess it's implied that he gets jumped and killed. But eventually, after a while, and he doesn't return, it starts getting darker, it's getting closer to night. The rest of the group get kind of freaked out, and they decide that they're just gonna abandon Uchida and make a run for it. Uchida's like adamant about not leaving the car, because at least in the car they have the bright headlights. So they set on their own and they depart and try to see what they can do. And they get through to the next tunnel, because there was like another tunnel ahead they were about to have to go through. And then they make it for a while until it gets super, super dark. And they start to hear kind of movements around in the tunnel and up ahead. And then dead ahead they find like a severed arm just laying there, which it's holding a flashlight, so I wondered if that was implied that it's the other friend. It's a pretty quick shot, so I don't really know, but yeah, they find the stalker there, and he starts to pursue them, and they start to run. And then, as they're running, they look up, and then there's Yoshie as well, big giant floating head, and she actually like swoops down and grabs the other dude and just like chomps him in half. It's real quick. There's kind of like a digital CG blood spray thing that happens, but it's pretty cool. Just in premise of like this giant like J-horror ghost head that floats down and just like chomps people in half. It's pretty brutal. I really liked it quite a bit. So in fear, Saki and Ayaka rush back to the car. There's nothing else they can do at this point. And back with, in that escape, like they get disconnected from one another. Saki makes it back first, and Ayaka's kind of missing. Her fate's like left up in the air. So alone with Uchida, they kind of finally talk about what's going on. And this is where we get more of the backstory that Uchida is like this reporter. And we learn that he was out there because his sister died in the forest. It was some kind of freak accident, like a car wreck that took her life. And he always thought there was kind of more to it, maybe. It never really sat right with him. It didn't quite make sense. And he feels like perhaps these entities are somehow responsible for it. But he had come out there to sort of like, pray for her, and um, was hoping to see if he could, figure anything else out while he was there about what happened. And yeah, so that's a decent backstory for him, I guess, if you need one. Of course, the premise of the game was so slight that you didn't really need more story going on, perhaps. But so him and Saki kind of debate about what to do a little bit, and eventually Ayaka shows back up. She's panicked. She's been on the run this entire time. And they let her back in the car. And then there starts to be some debate about, like, what can they do at this point? Because it's nighttime. They don't know if they can make it through the night. They're really only protected as long as the car battery lasts. And there's kind of been implications that it's really old and could run out at any time. So we get into this thing of, like, they're brainstorming solutions. And Saki suggests that, like, they saw Uchida's motorbike back up the ways. He just needed to do a few more things to fix it, which is, again, a reference back to the game. And so, with their, like, remaining flashlight they have, she suggests that Uchida takes it, run back, fix the bike, and then come to get them. And then they make a run for it. And they're very reluctant about it. Ayaka doesn't want to turn over the flashlight. She wants to keep it to feel safe. But they wrest it away from her. Uchida takes it, and he sets off to go get his bike. And left alone, like, Ayaka and Saki, they have this falling out where Ayaka gets, like, very accusatory. When they rummaged the car, they found a road flare, so that's now their last, like, emergency source of light if they need it. And Ayaka sort of accuses Saki of, like, trying to betray her. She says, the bike can only hold 2 people, so when Uchida gets here, obviously he's going to take you, and then you two are just going to abandon me here and leave me to die. And she's like, I'm not having that. And, Saki's trying to talk sense to her, and she's like, the bike's really our only solution. I don't care who goes, just, someone needs to go get help, and that's our only way out. So, as you might expect in this kind of film, Ayaka decides to go rogue, and that she's just going to take the flare and use it to make a run for it. Which she does. She sets out, and, it's a road flare, so she didn't really consider this, but she makes it a little ways into the tunnel, and the flare dies out, and then she also becomes ghost food as she gets chomped on by Yoshie. This leaves Saki all alone in the car, nothing else to do, and we get this awesome scene where, like, it's the stalker, but there's, like, multiple versions of it, and more of them start to flood out of the tunnel, and they're, like, marching toward the car, and they get so far until they're, like, illuminated by the headlights. And it's this really sinister thing of them just frozen in the middle of the road staring at Saki in the car. And it's like the light won't let them approach any further. So they're just standing there, like, tirelessly, patiently waiting. Because they know eventually they'll be able to get there. And then about right on cue, the lights start to dim. The battery dies. And with no other recourse, as they begin to advance, Saki kind of turns on the light of her phone to use as, like, a last-ditch little thing to protect herself. And she goes running off in the direction of Uchida, hoping that maybe he has the bike ready at this point. And as she's being chased and pursued, Yoshie's pulling up behind her too, coming to chomp her in half. And she makes it back to Uchida, who has fixed the bike. And just as he gets it ready, she kind of hops on. And he's got his camera there. That's the camera he's used for, like, his news reports and stuff. And he kind of makes a remark about, like, the ride's not free, and that she needs to take that camera and use the flash to, like, protect them. And then we get this kind of weird, like, it's a video game sequence almost, and, like, there is a little video game sequence in the game. I guess I didn't explain that fully, but in the Death Forest game, once you gather all the items to fix the bike, there's this, like, final sequence where you have to ride out of the forest while Yoshie chases you. And you can screw it up, you can, like, hit something and wreck, and then you get a game over, which is a little frustrating. But they try to recreate that in the film, but they make it a little more epic, and this is the one spot where I think the budget really shows, and it kind of looks a bit too rough, I would say. Because they're on the bike, they're racing through the forest, you have Yoshie following along after them, and this is one of those things where, to talk about it too, like, in the Death Forest game, Yoshie is basically just like a 2D picture, like a JPEG. And they do this kind of blocking thing where, like, no matter which way you turn, she's always facing you. So it seems like it's a floating head, even though it's a flat image. So she's actually a little more creepy in the film in some ways because they filmed a person's head and then have just kind of blown it up and superimposed it in the shot. So, but the downside of this is that for the chase sequence, you can really tell that it's like another thing they've blocked into the frame that shouldn't be there. So we get this cool chase scene where like Yoshie will get really close to them, and then Saki will use the camera flash to repulse her and shoot her back and scare her away. Gave me a little vibe of like the Fatal Frame game series. That's another survival horror video game series that's really popular. And that one, it pulls entirely from J-horror tropes as well, but the core of it is they have this thing called the camera obscura, which is like this enchanted camera that can like exorcise spirits with its flash. Which actually that also has a live action film, and it's one maybe I'll talk about it on here, or perhaps that one would be worthwhile to get Jason in on too. But the interesting thing with that is that like the film is almost nothing like the games, other than some vague references, and yet somehow it is kind of good too. So that's an interesting road to run down one day. But they repulse Yoshie, they continue on, and eventually they make it out, and they find themselves in like the morning sunlight as they come out the other end of the forest and ride off to safety, having survived the night. Interspersed through some of that, before it gets like too ramped up, there's a little bit of more detective action. We cut to them once where they come to the restaurant on the side of the road, and they kind of ask the lady there if she knows anything about the missing people or anything like that, and she's just sort of weird and evasive and acts like she hasn't seen anyone. And then she offers them to like sit down and have a meal, but they kind of decline because they're working. So our little coda as we come back to the detectives, and they're back in the area sort of following up on things. The way they're talking is it sounds like Uchida and Saki made it out okay, and they got their like story of what happened, and it seems unbelievable. And they're just trying to like search around now and get some confirmation on things. So they return back to that restaurant, and when they inspect it this time, there's no one there at all. And so it seems to sort of just like a weird little creepy dead end. And as they're leaving, one of the detectives looks over, and we see it's a kind of like a funeral picture of a woman. And we realize that the proprietress of the restaurant has been dead for like a really long time. And so in fact that was a ghost as well. So it's a little stinger before it smashes into the credits. So that is Death Forest, and it's, they kind of just took the premise of the game and then they built an additional story around it about some 20-something people that come to the forest to get killed. I guess you kind of have to do that if you really want to, have some kills in the film, since the game just has the one guy and nothing much else going on there. So then the question is what are these sequels, right? Like, how are they going to go? I don't know. I've not actually watched any of them. And so that's something maybe I'll explore on these as we need more filler episodes. I'm sure, the characters are kind of iconic as far as the monsters and their look. I guess they could just keep sending, wads of 20-somethings in there to die, perhaps. But for it to have made it to 5 films, there had to be something worthwhile to at least make them sell. So I'm curious, and we'll see what happens there. But I guess for now, I will just sort of summarize my thoughts on this film. It's not a great movie, and it's not original, and it's not revolutionary. This is kind of one of those things where it's just like junk food for me, though. Like, it's not very long. It runs like 65 minutes, so you're barely over an hour investment in this, and like, it moves pretty quick. The slowest part is like just the build up with the kids once they're like getting into the forest, but they're not lost yet. But it's fun. The monsters look cool. There's fun music, good atmosphere, some bad effects, some good effects. All in all, I think it's pretty unremarkable, but I mean, it has its cool moments. Like the stalker looks super cool. And like, even though the gore effects aren't the greatest, the premise, the idea of this giant floating head that like snaps people in half, it's pretty brutal. So even if it's shitty, like, it's kind of fun. It has some neat moments. I think if I had to review it, I would probably just give it 2 stars. Usually my rule on 2-star films is like there was something compelling there that I liked, but I may never go back again. I do think I might go back for this one again in the future, just because like it is so short. Like it would be easy to rewatch if you just wanted to like slam through these or show somebody, and you're not really gonna hurt yourself to go back in again at that point. But I suspect for most people who don't have a love and a deep tolerance of J-horror films like I do, this will be pretty unremarkable, pretty unmentionable, other than the kind of weird twist that it's based on a game that's kind of like a J-horror spin on the Slenderman game. Otherwise, there's maybe not too much compelling about it, but I think it's cool, and I think it's weird when those like obscure games or urban legends or anything like that gets made into a film. There's some cool like Japanese horror films that don't have releases over here, like based on the story of like One Man Hide and Seek, which is a really cool urban legend, or even some creepypastas. Like recently there was a Kisaragi Station film. I've actually not seen that yet. I need to get to it. So it's cool when these weird, obscure, like fan-made horror things have blown up enough that they get like the attention to become a film. One thing that Death Forest super made me think of was a film called Ao Oni, which translated I think would just be Blue Demon. That Ao Oni, that was a computer game that was like a fan-made thing. It was about this like blue ogre demon thing chasing after some kids trapped in like a creepy mansion. And that got turned into a film, and same thing, that film is shit. And yet somehow weirdly compelling and fun at the same time. And it too, it only runs like I think 70 minutes, so yeah, something about these weird little obscure like Japanese horror fan things that get turned into films, and they're really short, but equally shitty and compelling at the same time. So all that is to say, Death Forest is out there. You can find it. Again, the sub-quality is gonna vary wildly, so you'll have to see what happens. I think these would sell if someone grabbed up all 5 and, gave them some good translations, cleaned them up, made a little box set or something. Why not? It would be cool. It would be an easy sell, I think, but, who knows what'll happen. So, that's Death Forest. That's gonna be the end of this episode. Thank you for sticking it out with me. Ideally, we'll be back next time, full force, with Jason, talking about Heroic Purgatory, and then we'll be following that up with a listener episode. So please continue to send us in your suggestions. We want to know what you think is cool, what you like, what you've been enjoying. Let us know. Tell us films we should seek out and see. Whatever, foreign films, your personal favorite. Have a weird one that you want more eyes on, more people to talk about. You got a favorite and you're just like, man, why do no film podcasts ever talk about my favorite movie? Well, we will. You just got to send it in to us. And you can do that by reaching out to us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, or you can email us at genreexposure@gmail.com. Just shout it out into the aether, man. Like, you can manifest that if you want. I believe in it. I believe, and I believe in you. And I believe in you that believes in me. So this has been my J-Horror Journal. We've been chatting about Death Forest. Hope you liked it. Hope it at least filled a little bit of time in your day. And you came away from it and you're like, maybe I'll go watch this weird film. Or you know what, if you're a gamer and you're not up for the film, try the game, because it's weird but pretty fun. I'm actually really terrible at it. I had a thought that I might try to film myself playing the game and share it, but I'm like garbage tier at it. Like, I don't know what it is. Something about the ones where you just have to run and your only option is to run and nothing else. I get very frustrated because kind of the core of those is you eventually just have to get the patterns of like how stuff moves and the layouts of the area. And there's something in the trial and error of that like loses my enjoyment. So not for me, but I'll be sure to link to like a cool run through of it online that you can check out if you just want to see the game in action. And yeah, otherwise, I hope you're doing great. I hope you're taking care. Reach out to us, even if it's just to be like, hey, I watched such and such and thought it was cool. We love hearing from you. And you have been listening to Genre Exposure. Everybody take care.
You're listening to the Prescribed Films Podcast Network, home to hundreds of hours of free podcast entertainment. The shows on this network all have a common goal: providing you with the best discussions about movies and other forms of entertainment media. The PFPN hopes to fill your earholes with audio joy. Visit our website with links to all the other amazing shows at www.thepfpn.com. Thanks for listening.